Good afternoon. Welcome to This Week in Environmental Justice. I'm your host, Tim Cromartie. Our guest today, we're here with Tamara Raspberry-Harris, one of our board members. Our guest today is State Senator Nancy Skinner, representing the East Bay communities of Hercules, San Leandro, and all points in between along the East Bay corridor, including Berkeley and Oakland. In the legislature, she has been a champion on multiple issues, including encouraging transition to zero-emission vehicles, expediting permitting, streamlining housing construction, as well as carbon sequestration and promotion of green hydrogen production. The Environmental Justice League tends to take positions on bills with a particular focus on the impact on Black and Brown communities. And our mantra tends to be reduce emissions now, which is why your bill, Senator, came to our attention. We're here today to discuss Senate Bill 1075. We appreciate your willingness to take time out to discuss it with us. Tamara, do you want to
Welcome.
start off?
Yeah. Welcome, Senator. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Good. So we wanted to talk about your SB 1075, your green hydrogen bill. And your bill, among other things, establishes a funding structure within state government for investments in green hydrogen production in the form of grants for production. It also directs the Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank to prioritize investment in green hydrogen from the private sector. Why do you believe these steps are necessary toward achieving our state goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, green hydrogen, first off, is hydrogen, which is one of our most abundant elements. It's hydrogen produced from renewable sources. So it is not much of the hydrogen that's in play today is produced using fossil fuel to extract the hydrogen from water. But green hydrogen is a renewable resource, and it's the ultimate flexible resource because it can be used. No, it's funny I'm saying to integrate renewables. Well, why do I say that? Because at the points when our solar is just going gangbusters, but it's producing more electricity than we need at a given time, we can use the electricity that the solar is producing to produce green hydrogen. It can also, the green hydrogen can then be used later, it can be stored to be used later when the sun isn't shining and we're not getting the electricity from the solar power. It's also got the great ability to decarbonize difficult sectors because it can power industrial plants. And it can also be used, for example, in our heavy-duty trucks, goods movement. And from that point of view, it's really important because if we can replace diesel with things like green hydrogen, then we get rid of a very unhealthy source of air pollution. So those are some of the reasons why we're so committed to promoting green hydrogen.
Very good. And so in layman's terms, for people who don't have an understanding of hydrogen and how hydrogen can be used as a fuel, how does 1075 improve air quality besides the replacement of fuels?
Right. So my bill essentially does a couple of things. First, it asks California to establish a clean hydrogen hub because the federal government in the recent infrastructure monies and bills they've passed has put a big investment saying, look, states, you can compete. And if you have matching funds, we'll give you money to form a hydrogen hub. So I want California to be able to compete. So one thing my bill would be establishing a clean hydrogen hub in California. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing it does is direct our state agencies to integrate green hydrogen into what we call our decarbonization planning. So in simple terms, that means fossil fuels are one of your biggest sources of greenhouse gases, the things that are causing the climate crisis, and green hydrogen does not pollute the climate. It is not a greenhouse gas. So as we are trying to move off fossil fuels, we're asking then our Air Resources Board to develop a roadmap for how to use hydrogen, how to integrate it into all of the things that we need to replace fossil fuels for. And it also requires our Energy Commission to help us define how hydrogen can be part of our renewable portfolio standard. And that means the renewable portfolio standard is California has dedicated itself to produce our electricity 100% from renewable resources, from non-fossil fuels. So we're talking solar, wind, but since hydrogen can be produced from solar and wind, then I think it could be eligible to help us meet that goal, but we need to have some help by our agencies to define that.
Well, on that note, Senator, one of the challenges of hydrogen production, depending on the method chosen, is the emission of greenhouse gases as a byproduct. So will SB 1075 encourage production of hydrogen that keeps emissions of those greenhouse gases as byproduct to a minimum? Is it safe to say that?
So the way we get hydrogen, it's an element, but the way that we access it is we have to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen in water. And that's an energy intensive process. That's not easy. And most of us most of the world still relies on fossil fuels for energy. So it's a fossil fuel power plant or a fossil fuel generator or a fossil fuel, device that is then being utilized to separate hydrogen and oxygen from water to give us hydrogen. Now, if you use a fossil fuel device, then you aren't creating green hydrogen because you've got a lot of fossil fuel in there. Whereas if we use a solar powered process to extract that, then that's how we produce green hydrogen. So the emissions related to hydrogen, there's no emissions from hydrogen once it's extracted. No, it's clean.
Correct.
But the emissions that would result or would be associated would be because you used fossil fuels to extract it. And we don't want to do that. That's why we use the term green hydrogen.
To denote that the base from that is coming from a renewable source. Yeah.
Yes.
And we like renewable sources here at the Environmental Justice League.
Good.
And we appreciate and advocate for replacing diesel, especially when we're talking about heavy transport, which especially impacts the Black communities that live around high traffic areas, many of which are found in your district.
Oh, yes. I mean, this is the thing. While everyone legitimately is very focused on the climate crisis, and it's real and it's happening now, we still have very unhealthy and dirty air, especially in our what we call environmental justice communities, those communities that have been most impacted historically by pollution. And those type of communities are communities that are near oil refineries, communities near ports, communities because they're near ports, they're near the goods movement, whether it's by train or big trucks, and trains still operate on diesel and trucks are still operating on diesel, and that's even more polluting than regular gasoline, meaning the particulate matter and the exhaust from that is very damaging to our lungs. And who gets that most severely? The people that live closest to those facilities and to those goods movement corridors. So by using green hydrogen at our ports, for example, in our trucks, we're going to reduce that pollution that's plaguing our environmental justice communities.
Right. You spoke earlier on this, some argument that hydrogen, the production of hydrogen, if a fossil fuel is the base, then there's an emission. But what your bill and what you're advocating for is using the renewable sources to create that. Are there any other, not wanting to give voice to your opposition, but are there any other opposition arguments happening in 1075 that you would like to address right now?
Well, the great thing about 1075 is so far we've had strong bipartisan support, not a single no vote yet. So that's a great thing. And when we look around the world, I mean, part of my interest is let's make sure that California is competitive, because we've got other parts of the world that are making big announcements on green hydrogen. Spain and Australia, for example, Spain just put out that they're going to have the ability to produce 7.4 gigawatts of green hydrogen by a process called electrolyzers. They're going to use electrolyzers to do that by 2030. That's not that far away.
Wow.
And Australia is making a $2 billion investment in hydrogen infrastructure to produce 65 tons of green hydrogen a day. So we want to make sure that California, we've been at the lead of so much in the clean energy space and the renewable energy space, and we want to stay there.
What about the federal investment? You mentioned two countries already. What's the federal investment in?
Well, the
in
federal
green hydrogen?
infrastructure bill included almost $10 billion for hydrogen investments, with this competitive grant program that would provide $2 billion each for what they call regional hydrogen hubs. And we're expecting that states would compete for that. But the federal government requires a matching fund. So that's why I wanted to make sure that that our budget this year had some money so we could do that match and be competitive.
Would California have one hub? Would California be its own hub, or would there be two hubs or
I
three?
want to have a hub in California.
Okay, great. Well, just as a question about your background, Senator, how did you get into this green energy space? Because you're not just an advocate for green, meaning, recycling, reducing emissions, and clean water. Like you get in the nitty gritty of the policies, and the policies as well as any regulator that I've come across in this space. So how did you get into working in the energy space?
Well, it's interesting. Back when I was an undergrad and I was, an active environmentalist, the 3 Mile Island incident occurred. Mm-hmm. So that was that nuclear accident. And at the same time, Carter was the president. We were in what was called energy crisis, but really it was around gasoline. And there was this feeling like we had to, we were dependent on, international sources for our gasoline, and that was crippling the U.S. And yet our nuclear energy was basically dangerous. So there was this big fervor for, why aren't we using the sun? Why aren't we using renewable energy? And I remember Brown was governor. There was the first time he was governor, and he set up a program called Solar Cal, and he set up these other programs. And they announced an event called Sunday, a day like Earth Day, to get energy self-reliance and promote solar. So my friends and I decided we would organize the Sunday events at the UC Berkeley campus, which we did. And we had Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden speaking at Sproul Plaza, the big rally. And, that just took off from there. So I was also incredibly fortunate as a UC Berkeley student to study under Art Rosenfeld. Art Rosenfeld is the guru of energy efficiency. Mm-hmm. And so I took his classes as well as classes from John Holdren. John Holdren was President Obama's advisor around climate crisis. So I was really immersed in really big thinkers about how to be more energy efficient, how to move to renewable sources and not have to be dependent on fossil fuels, how to have that clean, green energy. So I just got really interested in it and ended up starting a project back in 1992 called Cities for Climate Protection, where I enlisted cities all over the world to make commitments to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and to analyze what it was in their city, the decisions that they made that contributed to our dependence on fossil fuels. So in that process, the cities would think about their transportation decisions, their street lighting decisions, their waste practices, all of that, because it all had a bearing. And of course, if I was advising them, I better know what I'm talking about. So that's how I learned.
Yes, you could. You have the knowledge of any PhD in energy that I have met. Let me tell you, Senator Skinner knows what she's talking about. I'll go ahead and close. Thank you, Senator Skinner, for your time. We appreciate you coming on Environmental Justice League and talking about SB 1075. And it is one of a priority bill. And so we thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts. And we hope to talk to you again soon.
Great. I appreciate it. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.